Throughout the last few decades, the Mario Kart genre has cemented itself as a legendary part of video game history. Especially with more recent titles, Mario Kart has become a game that anyone could have fun with, whether it's casually playing with your friends at a party or grinding time trials and competing in competitive tournaments. However, when it comes to the Mario Kart franchise, there is one defining trait that makes the series shine brighter than ever before. This trait is not only raised the skill ceiling for Mario Kart, but allowed for stories to be formed. Stories that sometimes I can't even get to believe myself. This would of course be the shortcut. Now when it comes to shortcuts, there are shortcuts that are intended by the developers of the game, but beyond that lies an astronomical arsenal of shortcuts that were never thought to ever be possible by the developers of the game. The way these shortcuts have evolved from simple cuts in Super Mario Kart to the insane sequence breaks in Mario Kart Wii is nothing short of amazing. So today I've decided to go back in time and tell the complete story of how these shortcuts have evolved from the first game all the way to the present day, as the journey to get where we are now might be one of the most remarkable journeys in gaming history. This is the Mario Kart Shortcut Revolution. August 27th, 1992 marks the beginning of our journey with the release of Super Mario Kart on the SNES. From the get-go, there are a lot of various cuts that you can do on a multitude of tracks, and as you all know, this would definitely become a trend for all the following Mario Kart entries. However, there is one item that actually helps do some more advanced shortcuts, an item that would only appear in this entry. This would be the Feather power-up, which gives you a boost in height, and as you might imagine, it allows for some pretty crazy shortcuts, such as this one in Bowser's Castle, where you use it to go somewhere you usually couldn't go to. Now normally landing here will just cause Lakitu to just bring you back to where you were, but if you land in the right spot, you're actually able to use Lakitu to your advantage to make it to the finish line. Considering this is the first entry in the series, you would imagine it'd be more broken than its successor, but this thought cannot be any farther from the truth. When it comes to Mario Kart 64, there are 16 tracks, and within these 16 tracks, you can either beat the track with 3 laps as fast as possible, or you can do 1 lap as fast as possible, also known as a flap. There's also of course beating the entire game as fast as possible, which serves as a strong motivation for finding and optimizing shortcuts across all games. Now remember when I said that this game was broken? Well, out of the 16 tracks, there's an unintended shortcut or sequence break on almost every single track. Some shortcuts are of course easier than others, such as this shortcut on Rainbow Road, where all you really need to go and do is just drift and hop, and you could skip like half of the track. Or how about this shortcut that you do in Luigi's Raceway, where you go backwards to the finish line, and wait a minute, how the hell are these laps counting? Well, every Mario Kart game has something called the checkpoint system. The checkpoint system is of course different for every game, and even every track, but the idea is the same. The idea here is that the checkpoint system checks that you are actually driving through the entire track, meaning that there are invisible checkpoints throughout each track to verify that you're actually doing a lap. Failure to pass through these checkpoints means that your lap won't count, and this was put into place to prevent massive exploits from happening. However, as we all know, the checkpoint system can be exploited. This takes us back to Luigi's Raceway, and this is why you go forward here and then turn backwards, because you need to go forward enough to hit the first checkpoint. That way you could go back to the finish line, and for some reason, if you hit this wall at a specific point, it verifies the other checkpoints, allowing for your lap to count. While we're on the topic of bumping into walls, I present to you Wario Stadium. Yeah, no, the shortcut here is literally just bumping into this wall and then bumping into the wall again across the finish line. This means that for a 3-lap completion, you are bumping into the wall 6 times in a row. However, there is an infamously difficult trick that uses this same technique on a different track. A trick so difficult that it took literal years for someone to get a 3-lap world record with it for the first time. I present to you the Weather Tanko.
Yes! Let's go! Let's go! That's it!
Now this may look super easy, but the places you have to bump on within the mountain are rather precise, and most attempts will result in either the failure to scale the mountain or failure to make the lap count, considering that doing this in this specific way somehow triggers all the checkpoints you need. Despite this trick being discovered years upon years ago, it is still super difficult even to this day. Outside of those shortcuts, there are a few more, such as this one in Calamari Desert where you go to the train tracks, or how about this sequence break in Frap Snowland, or my favorite, which involves doing whatever this is on Toad's Turnpike. The impact that the dedicated Mario Kart 64 community has had on finding and pulling off shortcuts not only sets the bar high for shortcut discovery in the following games, but exposes the true potential of game-breaking shortcuts. As Nintendo made its way into the 21st century, so did Mario Kart, and in 2001, Mario Kart Super Circuit was released on the Game Boy Advance. Now Super Circuit would go on to kind of serve as an upgrade to the original Mario Kart, as opposed to a sequel for Super Mario 64, as the style alongside some mechanics carry over to Super Circuit. Given Super Circuit's similarities to the original installment, I actually wasn't expecting there to be many shortcuts, but I was definitely wrong about that. Of course we have your intentional shortcuts, but when it comes to breaking the checkpoint system, this game is definitely no exception. I mean, just take a look at Cheep Cheep Beach. You're able to go backwards to reach a checkpoint, and then go all the way out into the water here to get another checkpoint, which altogether allows for you to exploit the entire track. However, what I noticed with not only this shortcut along with many others is that they were tool assisted, meaning that these were not physically done by a human. Despite this, there is one track that is not only my favorite in this installment, but a track that I think gives justice to shortcuts in Super Circuit. This track would be none other than Rainbow Road. Now instead of there being walls on the side of the roads, this track is filled with strips of platform that you can actually bounce off of. This means that you're able to continuously take advantage of these bouncing platforms to skip parts of the track, and in the end it results in some pretty crazy time trials. However, things were about to get a lot crazier. For the longest time, Double Dash had a reputation of being a game void of any unintentional shortcuts, with the exception being this one in Waluigi's Stadium. However, when 2018 rolled around, people started finding more and more shortcuts, quickly making what was once notorious for not having any game-breaking shortcuts a game that was filled with these shortcuts. See, Double Dash's checkpoint system was a little bit different compared to previous entries. To simplify things, the main change you need to know is that if you skip more than 50% of the level's checkpoints, the lap will not count. Now, like other games, you can of course land in certain areas, specifically out of bounds areas, and Lakitu will bring you somewhere that you're not supposed to be brought to, which in the case of Double Dash, Lakitu brings you to the end of the lap. However, a lot of these cause you to go over the 50% margin, meaning that this was useless. Unless it wasn't useless. Like I mentioned earlier, a shortcut was not found until 2018, with the exception of one in Waluigi's Stadium. And to put things into perspective, that is 15 entire years without a new shortcut, despite the game having a decent amount of inactivity. But this all changed with one shortcut that was discovered on Mushroom Bridge. Ironically enough, you drive off of the bridge, but it's not as easy as it looks. For the first part of this shortcut, you need to do this precise hop off of the grass here to make it to the first checkpoint. This hop is very difficult because the only way to truly hop in Double Dash is by doing something called A-Tech, where you let go of A while in the middle of drifting. What makes it even more difficult is that you have to do the hop at the exact right time and angle for it to work. Keep in mind, this is only the first part of the shortcut. Once Lakitu brings you back on track, you go back to the bridge, but this time drive to the top of it and hop off while aiming for this spot. Similar to the hop beforehand, this can be a lot harder than it looks. Now, doing this once will count one lap, but if you do it, I don't know, let's say 3 times in a row, then you are able to finish the stage, and years after the shortcut was discovered, this is exactly what Matthew did. This new understanding of the checkpoint system allowed for the discovery of a few more shortcuts, such as this exploit in Bowser's Castle using the aforementioned A-Tech hop, or this difficult trick that you can pull off in Mushroom City. Spoiler alert, this would probably be the closest Mario Kart would get to having no shortcuts. Just 2 years after Double Dash release, Nintendo released the revolutionary DS, and naturally, the DS came with a new Mario Kart game. This game, of course, being Mario Kart DS. This game would be the first time that retro tracks were introduced, so the track roster was much bigger for this game than previous entries, featuring 32 tracks to be exact. From the get-go, Mario Kart DS was a broken game. It was found super early on that you could chain drifts very quickly by moving your kart left or right, and this technique was famously coined the name snaking. Alongside snaking, there were a bunch of small shortcuts littered throughout the game. However, when it came to ultra shortcuts, there weren't that many, but there was one ultra shortcut that spoke to me. Similar to Super Circuit, Rainbow Road was absolutely busted. On October 17th, 2021, MK Dasher set a time trial world record of 137.561 by taking advantage of Mario Kart DS's crazy mechanics as well as its checkpoint system. Dasher starts off by driving here to trigger a checkpoint that you would normally reach far later in the course. He does this so that he can pull off this crazy jump here and then rinses and repeats to finish his 3 laps. I mean, the fact that you're able to just clip through the wall like this is nothing short of absurd, but it wouldn't be the first time walls have failed to serve their purpose. In fact, a lot of walls have been broken within the last 5 Mario Kart games that I've covered, but when the 6th game came around, shit got heated real fast. On April 10th, 2008, Mario Kart Wii was born. This game is the reason I've even used the term ultra shortcut throughout this video, and is the very same game that inspired me to make this video. After a large culmination of shortcuts, stories, discoveries, and sequence breaks throughout all of these Mario Kart games, it was time for new shortcuts to emerge, and what lied ahead was a new generation of Mario Kart players who were more determined than ever to push the game to its absolute limits. As Summoning Salt said best, Mario Kart Wii has a strange problem. Now, what exactly is this problem? Well, the problem can be simplified down to 2 things. The first problem is a problem that is ongoing in every Mario Kart game up to this entry, the checkpoint system. However, the second problem was a bit more complicated. This problem would lie in the mechanics of the game, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit when I say mechanics. It only took a few months for the first ultra shortcut to be found, and this shortcut truly showed how broken the checkpoint system was. If you drive around this rock on Grumble Volcano, it somehow triggers every single checkpoint that you need to get a lap to count. However, the checkpoint system wasn't this simple. It gets a lot more complicated when you get to tracks such as Mushroom Gorge. Now, in Mario Kart Wii, there are key shortcuts on each track, each key shortcut being different. However, between key shortcuts are regions. In this case of Mushroom Gorge, there are 4 regions. The game needs to be convinced that you are on region 4 by the time you finish the lap. Now, this means in theory that you could just drive backwards to region 4 and then cross through the finish line, right? Well, that's actually wrong, because if you go backwards through the finish line, the game will actually subtract a region from you, meaning that region 4 doesn't become region 4 anymore. But if there is a way to get to region 4 without hitting the finish line, what would that look like? Well, this is where the Mushroom Gorge Ultra shortcut comes into play. If you ride against this wall, you are effectively able to go from the first region checkpoint all the way to the last without being in the zone that would normally prevent your lap from counting. This same principle is what makes the Grumble Volcano shortcut possible, and it led way for many more ultra shortcut discoveries, such as this insane exploit where you go out of bounds to trigger all of the checkpoints in Coconut Mall, or this insanely precise pipe bounce used in Wario's Gold Mine. Now, remember when I said the mechanics were broken? Well, following this one new discovery, they were a lot more broken than we thought. I mean, we've bounced off pipes, driven through malls, and on rocks, and I mean, for crying out loud, we've scaled literal mountains with a fucking bike. However, this new discovery added to the ever-growing arsenal of shortcuts. This discovery would of course be the wall clip. If you perform a wheelie at the edge of something such as this pole in Ghost Valley, you are able to get an absurd amount of height, allowing for shortcuts crazier than ever before. This wall clip was first primarily used for a lot of tasks or tool assisted only shortcuts, but over time humans started taking more and more advantage of it, whether it be on Sherbert Land, Cheep Cheep Beach, Bowser's Castle, or even bouncing off the corner of this wall in Koopa Cape. Now, there's a plethora of not only ultra shortcuts, but shortcuts in general. I'm not kidding when I say there is quite literally some sort of shortcut on every single track, maybe with the exception of Yoshi Falls. But there is one shortcut that, in a way, has been coined the pinnacle of Mario Kart Wii shortcuts, perhaps the pinnacle of the shortcut revolution. Can you guess what the track is? Well, I'm just gonna let the clip play. Notice how I've talked about Mario Kart Wii for the longest out of any of the games I've mentioned. Well, if you couldn't tell, I have a bias towards this game, but that is not the reason. It's the sheer amount of shortcuts as well as the flaws in the checkpoint system and mechanics that allow for this game to be as broken as it is. But does Mario Kart Wii truly hold the title for the most shortcuts, or is it just the easiest game for humans to exploit? Despite Mario Kart Wii currently holding the throne for the most shortcuts, a second coming of the shortcut revolution would completely change everything, especially with the assistance of tools. But before I talk about the future of this revolution, we must talk about Mario Kart 7 and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now, like all other entries, Mario Kart 7 had a bunch of smaller shortcuts, and even some shortcuts that took advantage of the checkpoint system, such as this one on Woohoo Loop. However, this game would be a lot harder to break than Mario Kart Wii, as a lot of MK Wii's flaws were fixed in Mario Kart 7. When it came to ultra shortcuts, there just really wasn't much to work with, or at least that's what people thought. You remember how I was talking about tool-assisted speedruns aiding in people finding game-breaking shortcuts? Well, a little over 10 years after Mario Kart 7 was released, MK William released this mind-blowing task of a collection of shortcuts, and a lot of these shortcuts were found just prior to the release of the task, within quite a short time span. With Mario Kart 7 introducing the glider, people were able to use the glider to their advantage to pull off insane ultra shortcuts, such as the ones in DK Jungle, Mario Circuit, Neo Bowser City, and even Maple Treeway. Now wait a minute, how are you able to just clip through all of these walls? Well, I promise you it's a lot more precise than it looks, but at the same time, the collision on some of the walls aren't the strongest, and this would lead to the discovery of many more shortcuts. I hope you're starting to notice a common theme here. Every time a Mario Kart game seems to be void of ultra shortcuts or exploits, there's always someone who disproves that reality. What I'm basically saying is that when it comes to Nintendo versus the people always win in the end. However, I say that with the exception of one game, and that would of course be Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now, with the addition of 200cc, Deluxe would have plenty of new shortcuts, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Even with the addition of new tracks, which at the time of this recording were on wave 3, any chance at an ultra shortcut such as this one on Choco Mountain has been neglected because of how strong the checkpoint system is. To add on to that, TAS is in very early development when it comes to Nintendo Switch games, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is no exception. So for the time being, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has not had its Mario Kart shortcut revolution yet. Keyword yet. The future of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's shortcut revolution is only inevitable, especially when people are able to put it through a task. I mean, for crying out loud, not all of the tracks are even out yet. As for other games, there are plenty of shortcuts that have been found through tasks, and over time, more of these shortcuts have become humanly possible. However, there are still many shortcuts to be pulled off for the first time, many shortcuts to be discovered, and most importantly, many shortcuts to be mastered. The second coming of a shortcut revolution is upon us, and even games as old as Mario Kart 64 or Mario Kart Double Dash are still undergoing new discoveries to this day. This is why I've informed you all of this, as I guarantee within the next few years there will be a surplus of game-breaking shortcuts. In fact, maybe one of you watching this video right now might feel inspired to find a shortcut of your own that changes everything. Regardless, the Mario Kart shortcut revolution has been one of, if not the most impressive feats in gaming history, with an ever-growing amount of players as well as the advancement of tools used to dissect the games piece by piece. You are not going to want to miss the future of this revolution, because we're just getting started.